I hate this lens. It's missing all sorts of modern features. No autofocus, no electronic aperture, no image stabilization, and the image itself, it's kind of soft. But like, I don't know, soft in like a nice way. It's still kind of sharp. You can see all the details, but just has this nice like glow to it, you know? I mean, it's soft and it's got all sorts of aberrations, like the bokeh is all like weird and oval shaped and kind of swirly at the edges. Although, you know, it is kind of nice. It like it just kind of really brings you into the subject of the image and actually kind of draws the eye to the middle of the frame, which is kind of nice sometimes. But like not all the time, because you know this is a terrible lens. In the colors, you know, you don't get nearly as much color contrast as you do with modern lenses. It's kind of got like this flat, like I don't know, almost filmic look a bit, kind of vintage, a little warm too. It's actually quite nice. Fine, I can't hide it. I love this lens. It's great. It's got the perfect mix of soft and sharp right where you need it. It's got the awesome swirly bokeh that everyone raves about. And it's just overall some good quality glass. The best part about it, you can buy these on eBay for 50 bucks. What's not to love? So why this lens? Why is this lens so famous? I mean, for good reason. This lens is actually based off of the Zeiss Biotar 58mm f2. I know, an exact clone basically. However, the Biotar featured more aperture blades and overall had less aberrations when it came to the bokeh and just the image in general, which ironically is what makes this lens so famous. Now you see, if you want to get yourself a Zeiss Biotar these days, it's probably gonna cost you about $1,000 for a working lens. There's plenty of other options out there. However, most of them are around the $200 to $300 range, and they are absolutely either beat to death or the glass is all sort of scratches and fungus on it, which is very difficult, if not impossible, to get off. Pretty much if you want one, you have to either spend $1,000 or be an expert lens crafter and be able to restore it yourself. Meanwhile, this lens was made for nearly 50 years, from 1950 to 1999, so there are tons of these out in the wild. A lot of them came as kit lenses for various Russian film cameras, so whether or not people actually wanted them, they got them. During the nearly 50-year production cycle this lens had, it's gone through quite a few iterations, and there's plenty of guides and stuff about which does what, and I'm not really going to get into it, but as a basic rule of thumb, the longer they went with it, the more they improved upon the lens. There are some duds out there. Again, I would recommend looking up a guide of purchasing before you actually buy one of these, but I'm going to talk about one very specific one, which is the Helios 44M-4. The Helios 44-2 is not the first iteration, it's I think the second or third, but it is the most famous one because it's the most prevalent, and also it's the one that has the most of the swirly, beautiful bokeh. They all have the same aperture of f2, all with the same 6 aperture blades, I believe, at least. Don't fact check me on that. Actually, do fact check me on that, please. The one I have here, the 44M-4, has less aberrations with it. It's a more clear, true to reality image than the classic 44-2. Who the heck would want an old vintage lens that doesn't do old vintage lens things? Well, it still does, but just less, more tame. And personally, I kind of fell in love with that because it makes the lens more usable on a wide variety of projects. It doesn't have the super swirly bokeh that almost can be a bit nauseating, especially in video format. For photography, I think it's great. Go ham with it. But for video, when there's a lot of motion, sometimes something like that can be very distracting, and I wasn't personally a fan of that. I enjoyed it. I got one because this one still has a little swirly bokeh. Don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to get rid of swirly bokeh. But it's got less. And because this one has less, sometimes with less, you can do more. This one in particular is a cinema modded lens. What the heck is that? I'm so glad you asked. Let me tell you. It's a great question. Great question. This one here has been modified in a couple different ways. It has been re-greased and kind of restored, which isn't really a modification, but it is something to note. The place I got it from also added on like this little like lens hood thing. It just kind of screws on. It's not really part of the lens, but it's just good to note. But the part that makes it more of a cinema lens is that the aperture actually has a smooth ring instead of something that clicks on each step. Another thing is that this one has a oval shaped bokeh. So the reason for that is it's to mimic anamorphic lenses, which are classically used in Hollywood. Now you could argue it's kind of gimmicky, but I kind of like it. Even in Hollywood, that whole anamorphic thing, it's just a look nowadays. They used to use it for doing ultra wide film on projectors way back in the day, but now anamorphic lenses, it's just a style, it's just a look, and this is the same thing. It's just achieving the same look in a different way. You know, if the end result's the same, does it really matter how you get there? That's not good life advice. Do not take that and run with it. I'm not, no. And the final thing that makes this a cinema-ish lens is the flare. Now this lens has a little wire inside going across the lens element. Why the heck would you want that? Well, that is actually how this lens gets the anamorphic flare. Again, not actually how an anamorphic lens achieves that flare. I got it. But it looks cool and it's fun. Let me have some fun here, please. We'll get to the lens tests where you can really see it. But it looks pretty cool. But alas, what's a good YouTube lens review without test footage? That's what you're probably all here for anyway. So for the test, what I did is I put this lens up against this little Canon Nifty 50. Now this is an older version of the Nifty 50. I think this is to be exact, it is the 1.82. I believe, or II. I don't know much about this lens, but I do know that it's newer than this, I'll tell you that much. It is f1.8, so for the tests, I stopped it down to f2, just a little bit to make it even. For the camera that I'm using this on, they're gonna be on a Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 4K with a Viltrox speed booster. But yeah, take a look at some of this beautiful test footage. So starting out with the Canon 50mm, nothing really to note here. It's a standard 50mm lens. You know what you're getting. Mind you, for less than $100, this is absolutely great. And if you do not have a Nifty 50, you should get one. It's just, I don't make the rules, but it definitely is a rule. I just enforce them, so you better. Now heading over to the Helios, instantly noticed that the background is a little blurrier than the 50mm. There's a little more like, I guess, natural depth of field. You can also see the bokeh kind of curving again at the edge. It's got that little extra, a little pizzazz, a little flavor. I also like the way that the Helios captures skin tones better. The Canon seems to have a little more red in there and really makes my acne kind of looks like it's worse than it is, because it's actually not that bad. Don't look at it. But the Helios just kind of smooths it out. It's a bit like a beauty filter on there. Maybe that's just the beauty of vintage lenses. Now if we stop the lenses down to f4, you notice that they both sharpen up a bit. Again, the image gets a little darker. The background's a little less blurry, but the foreground is a bit sharper on both of these. The Canon, not much of a change, but you do notice it a bit. However, the Helios, I noticed when you stop it down to f4, it really sharpens up. It's almost like a whole new image, and I was very surprised by that. f2 all the way open up on the Helios is known to be quite soft in general, but at f4, I think people are not giving this lens enough credit for how sharp it is. I would argue it's one of the sharper lenses I have, and I think for a vintage lens, it's doing a great job. Now, ladies and germs, the moment you all have been waiting for, the flare test. So all the way wide open at f2, well, almost all the way wide open again, f1.8, but we're using f2. For the Canon, standard, you know, little flaring, little circular flaring, nothing to note. Again, it is kind of making my acne pop out a bit more, don't look at it. The Helios, massive flaring, look at that. Yeah, it's flaring up like a bad rash. That's, again, not a good analogy. It flares a lot, and you get the awesome anamorphic flare. Again, some people may say it's gimmicky, but like, it just has that Hollywood look that, it's a look, it's a style. Hollywood for themselves puts that in post sometimes, so I'm at least doing it in camera. Suck it, Hollywood. So back down to f4, like we do. Same kind of story as before with the little LED tree test. The Canon sharpens up a little bit, flare is definitely reduced a bit as well. My acne is still showing. So once again, at f4 with the Helios, I was very pleasantly surprised. It sharpened up a lot. The flaring is still a flashbang in your face, but you know, it's like it's a more tame flashbang. I guess the final part of this video, would I recommend this lens? Absolutely. Now, it is to note that this cinema modded version of it is a little more expensive. Said and done, to get it to my doorstep was about $170. Now, it did have to ship all the way from Ukraine, which in the current climate I did not know if this lens would actually ever show up, but it did, and actually a lot faster than I thought it would. It showed up in like, I think 3 or 4 weeks instead of like, I was expecting like 2 months. At least that's what eBay was telling me. But no, it shipped out the next day after I bought it, and here it is in my hands. If I'm gonna be honest, I would use this on pretty much any project. Maybe not like a super corporate video, but anything narrative-based, weddings, music videos, probably even commercials too, anything, I would use this lens on it. I think it has a really interesting look, and it's not as far off and as swirly as the Helios 44-2, but still has a little bit of that characteristic in it. Enough where you see it if you're looking for it, but also not too much where it's overwhelming, and I think that's why the 44M-4 sits at a really nice place. So if you're looking at getting one of these, especially for film, I would recommend the Helios 44M-4. Just buy one. Do it. They're great. Hope you enjoyed the video. Hope I helped you justify spending more money, because that's really what YouTube reviews are for anyway, let's be honest. So have a good one, and I'll catch you in the next video. Adios, amigos.